This is a podcast from the Business Times.
Singapore's population is rapidly aging. Some of this reflects a positive story. People are generally living longer. However, as the population ages, the government needs more revenue to fund expenditure in areas such as healthcare. Perhaps unsurprisingly, residential property tax rates have risen. Overall, property taxes, especially for some private home owners in 2024, are up significantly versus some time back. Many of us own our homes, and we cannot escape paying property taxes. So let's get to grips with this thorny issue. Welcome to PropertyBT, a podcast series by the Business Times. I'm senior correspondent Leslie Yee, and I'll be your host as we gather insights on all things Singapore property to help you in your property investment journey. To understand more about residential property taxes, I have Tricia Song, CBRE's Head of Research for Singapore and Southeast Asia. Welcome, Tricia.
Thank you for having me, Leslie.
I am an owner-occupier of a private home. I want to rent about my higher property tax bill. I mean, maybe some residential landlords are enjoying higher rents. But hey, I generate zero income from my owner-occupied home. My kid, for one, is too young to pay me rental. Yet, my property tax bill has gone up. This is because of how property tax is calculated, applying the tax rate to the annual value or AV of a home, which is determined based on estimated market rentals of comparable properties. As rents rose in 2022 and 2023, the AV of some homes increased substantially. Seems unfair that owner-occupiers must pay higher taxes in part because rents went up. Tricia, how burdensome are property taxes to owner-occupiers in Singapore? And is it fair that such taxes rise when rentals rise?
Leslie, I totally agree with you. On a personal basis, I would have complained so much when I received my property tax bill last year and again this year. But let us look at it on the policymaker's perspective. Property tax is an asset tax that's levied on property ownership. It's not a tax on rental income. However, when rent go up, asset value also goes up. So we have this conundrum. In Singapore, we have progressive property tax rates for residential properties, which means that the higher the value of the residential property, the higher the tax rate. So why progressive? I think, Leslie, you have mentioned, all the needs of the country, right, as the population ages. So progressive tax is a form of wealth distribution. So the richer part of the population will have to bear a higher burden. So your question on how burdensome is this property tax to owner-occupier? Now let us look at the statistics. In Singapore, 90% of the population own their homes. 80% of the population live in public housing or HDB. So for this segment, the HDB flats, AV is substantially lower and essentially below the threshold, most of them. So most do not even pay property tax. So there will definitely be some minority who will be living in higher value homes, and the top few percentage will be affected more with the rise in AV, even for the owner-occupier rates, in addition to the rise in the rates. So for those who are asset-rich, cash poor, the rise in the property tax will create some burden to them. There may be retirees, or they have very low income. They have been living in the same property for the longest time. So such rise in taxes do burden them. For the others, if you are living in a high-value home because you have higher income, the property tax rates are probably, a short-term pain. I think most of them can manage these property taxes.
Tricia, I think those were very useful points, especially on the progressive nature of property taxes. So obviously, it is the owners of higher value properties who bear a higher property tax burden. A good practice to be retirement ready is to have a fully paid up home. However, hanging on to an owner-occupied home may not be easy with higher property tax bills. I think in Singapore, as you pointed out, there is a group of asset-rich, cash flow poor retirees. Such persons own homes that have seen prices rise substantially, but their cash flow may be weak. Tricia, how badly does higher property tax hurt retirees? Will this cause some retirees to move from private to HDB homes?
I think let us look at such retirees who have been living in the private homes. So if they do move homes, I would say that it's definitely not due to property taxes. It's more for right sizing, for example, because they are now retiring or retired to fit their lifestyles. In private houses, there are many facets to costs, such as maintenance costs, service charges, utilities, and property tax is only one of them. So some retirees may consider right sizing to channel some of the money to fund retirement. And I would say that for us staying in private property, we have also seen maintenance costs going up, not just property taxes. So does it change your mind to actually move out? A lot depends on your other considerations. Are you also willing to actually move out from the current lifestyle that you're actually used to? Or are you willing to make a change to accommodate your new needs, to travel, for example, rather than staying at home? So I think there are more considerations than the property tax.
Tricia, indeed, I guess as more people age here, the whole issue of right sizing of homes will certainly be something that many people will have to consider. It can be tough parting with a well-loved home, but then maybe one's housing journey could be viewed as a series of upgrades and downgrades as one goes through different stages in life. Now let's look at non-owner-occupied homes. They have generally been hit even harder by higher property taxes. Residential property tax rates are higher for non-owner occupiers versus owner occupiers. And the leasing market for private homes appears to be weakening amid a large spike in completion of new private homes last year. Also, some tenants are balking at private home rentals, which have risen substantially post-COVID pandemic. Should residential landlords panic? Tricia, how does higher property tax impact the value proposition of investing in residential property?
I think once upon a time, buying multiple homes actually means, a lot of investment income. But that is before all the taxes, the ABSD and the cooling measures that came around. So if you look at the investing tends to have at least two perspectives in returns. You're trying to get rental income and plus capital gains in the future when you sell the property. For rental income, hopefully they can cover the mortgage, property tax, maintenance, and then you still get some left over, so that will be positive carry. But if it is not enough, you may have to fork out from your own pocket. So there may be times where you're actually not able to cover. For example, your unit is vacant for a long time. And as Leslie has said, rentals could come down as well. Or maybe you lose your job. So 100% no cash flows. Interest rates have moved up. Property taxes that we are talking about, maintenance costs has gone up. So all these will actually eat into your returns. So a lot of people was telling me property investment is now a game for people with holding power. So if you don't have enough to cover in terms of, contingencies, you cannot wait for the capital gains to see it through. You might have to distress sell at a loss. So the key word is to do your sums. You must be able to take care of the mortgage payments. I think now the government has come in over the years with all the cooling measures. It's actually very hard to stretch, but it can still happen. So ideally, do your sums correctly. Do not overstretch. Have some savings just in case of rainy weather like this.
Tricia, indeed, beware of the rainy weather. I guess property is really a long-term investment, and as you point out, holding power is very important. Certainly, taxes eat into the rental returns of leasing out a home. However, as you pointed out, many investors here may be less bothered with the net yields they get from an investment home and more focused on potential capital gains. Still to come, will residential property taxes rise further?
In the latest episode of Lens on Singapore, we look at a disturbing global trend and ask the question, is anyone too young for cancer?
Which is when I went to the hospital for a full body check, and that's when they found out more.
Are young adults prepared to deal with the emotional, physical, and financial impact of facing such a daunting medical crisis? The Business Times podcast team goes behind the numbers to get some answers. Listen to Lens on Singapore at bt.sg or wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, back to PropertyBT from the Business Times.
Welcome back to PropertyBT. I'm Leslie Yee. The government sees property tax as a key source of taxing wealth. Property tax is effective as it is hard to avoid. Taxing wealth is vital in fighting inequality and fair because those with greater means contribute more. Looking ahead, owner-occupiers as well as non-owner occupiers of homes may see higher property taxes from a mix of higher rates and higher AVs. Tricia, do you see residential property taxes rising over the long term, and why?
If you recall, once upon a time, property tax rates is actually pretty low, especially for owner-occupier, and was pretty flat. I think really the need arose over the years because of the aging population. That's why you need more income sources for the government, and they do need to raise the wealth tax. And property tax is a form of wealth tax. So I think, Leslie, you have already pointed out, this is an essential move. And also, if you look at residential properties, the point is residential property is actually not a productive good. It's actually a consumption good. If you have the means for higher end consumption, you will have to share more in a burden. You have to pay more for the consumption. So it's only fair and equitable for the rates at this level. Potentially in the longer term, if there is a further need for more revenues, I can see that the property tax rates might actually still rise over the longer term. But it's really for the longer term good for the society.
Well, but even if property tax rates have to rise, maybe some groups of homeowners ought to enjoy concessions. Perhaps respect the old and help elderly retirees age with dignity by lowering the owner-occupier residential property tax for this group. Maybe a homeowner should pay a lower rate of property tax when a home is vacant because it is undergoing renovation or has difficulty finding a tenant. Also, should property taxes and the tax rates differ based on the nationality of owners? Certainly, the property tax system gets more complicated if we differentiate tax rates further based on owner profiles. Still, this may be the fair thing to do. Tricia, what do you think about this idea of applying different property tax rates based on owner profiles?
Leslie, you had me. I would definitely feel very compassionate to the elderly retirees. But let's put your question in perspective. If you look at the vacant homes, it's really a waste of resources. By giving them a lower tax rate just because it's vacant, they have difficulty finding tenant, I would say this would be a misallocation of resources because it does not actually encourage the landlords to actually find a tenant to fill out the homes because they are paying a lower tax rate anyway. So if there's a mismatch, I wouldn't advocate lower property taxes for vacant homes. In fact, this tax rate should encourage them to actively find a tenant to fill up the home so that you actually don't waste the resources. As for the elderly retirees, I think it's a multifaceted answer for elderly retirees. For those who really like to age in place in a familiar environment, if they are already used to, let's say, landed GCB, landed detached, there's no right or wrong that, they want to continue staying. But because of that, they have these additional needs and wants, they should pay more. So I wouldn't advocate a separate tax rate for these people. If you are really in need of cash for the elderly retirees, you can rent out a portion of the place. And also, if the government really want to address a certain segment of this population, they can also give subsidies, for example, tax rebates, rather than a blanket lowering of the tax rates. As for the different nationalities of owners, again, tax rates should be uniform across. Otherwise, it would be very hard to administer. In the first place, I think nationalities of the owners should not matter in this case. And I think a tax rate across, just differentiating by the value of the homes, will actually be more efficient.
Tricia, so I guess from your point of view, I think you have a fair amount of pushback to these ideas of differentiating property tax rates based on owner profiles. I suppose we could debate this topic all day, but let's move on the conversation and look at non-residential property. When it comes to taxes, both the transaction and recurring taxes can be substantially lower for non-residential property versus private homes. Tricia, given the difference in taxes, are homes good buys, or should we be looking at non-residential property instead?
That's a good question. I think over the years, the returns from private home investing has definitely come off. So again, it really depends on the investor's objectives, your risk appetite, and also your investment amount. For residential property, we have 1.4 million homes in Singapore, 400,000 of them are private homes. It's definitely more liquid in the market. So for commercial property, not everyone would actually understand this property sector. If you're unfamiliar with these sectors, you may not feel comfortable to actually enter, or you would need to rely on certain advisors. So the hurdle to enter is definitely much higher for commercial properties. So in that sense, I would say residential property should probably still remain the key so-called investment vehicles for a lot more people on the street. Of course, I would like to encourage them to look more into commercial properties as well. If you do want to look at that, always approach commercial property advisors like ourselves or other agents to assist.
Tricia, so overall, I think higher property taxes do not detract from the value of owning one's home. One can enjoy asset value growth over the long term. One also has a sense of security. Still, we need to be mindful of being able to pay property tax, especially in our retirement years. Thank you to my guest, Tricia Song of CBRE.
Thank you.
That's it for PropertyBT this time. Join us next time where we get to grips with the residential leasing market. Whether you're a landlord or a tenant, come and get tips to help you navigate the housing rental market. Understand what is driving the HDB and private housing rental market. I'm Leslie Yee. Thank you for listening and happy property hunting.
This is a podcast by the Business Times. Find more BT podcasts at businesstimes.com.sg/podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is meant to provide general information only. SPH Media accepts no liability for loss arising from any reliance on the podcast or use of third parties' products and services. Please consult professional advisors for independent advice.